The room was in absolute silence when Patricia entered, her hands trembling as she held the small, worn fabric suitcase. She was only 17 years old, but her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had already lived a lifetime of rejection. Around her, men in dark suits observed her every movement with the coldness of those evaluating merchandise. The air was dense, heavy with cigar smoke, and the unmistakable smell of dirty money. She didn't know exactly where she was, only that her own parents had brought her there, negotiated her life as if she were a worthless object, and left without looking back. "She's healthy, but useless," her father had said, with a cruelty that still echoed in her ears. "She can't have children, but she's good for work." Those words destroyed her inside, but she didn't cry, not in front of them, never in front of them. The infertility had been discovered at 15, after months of unexplained pain and medical appointments her parents could barely afford. When the diagnosis came, everything changed. The looks of disappointment, the whispered comments, the way her mother averted her eyes when she entered a room. For them, Patricia had become a useless burden, incapable of fulfilling the only purpose they imagined for a daughter, to give them grandchildren and perpetuate the family name. On the other side of the room, sitting in a worn leather armchair, was a man everyone called only Mr. Caruso. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with gray hair slicked back and a thin scar cutting across his left eyebrow. His eyes were dark, almost black, and there was a strange mixture of authority and weariness in them. He was feared. Everyone knew that. He controlled half the city's underworld, commanded violent men, and had hands stained with blood. But at that moment, as he watched Patricia standing in the center of the room, something in him seemed to hesitate. He said nothing for a long time, just watched her, watched the way she kept her head up, even while afraid, watched the dignity her parents had tried to steal from her, but which still resisted fragile inside that thin and tired body. The men around waited in silence, some smoking, others just watching with empty expressions. There was tension in the air, as if everyone was waiting for a decision that would change the course of that night. Patricia felt the weight of every gaze, every breath, every passing second. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to wake up and discover this was just a nightmare. But the pain in her chest was too real, the cold in her stomach too concrete. This was happening. Her parents had really sold her. "How old are you?" Vincent finally asked, his voice deep and hoarse, but without hostility. Patricia swallowed hard, forcing herself to answer. 17. He nodded slowly, as if thinking, processing information only he knew. His men waited in silence, awaiting orders. Caruso was unpredictable. No one dared interrupt him. No one dared question his decisions. "And what were you told you'd do here?" he continued, leaning slightly forward, elbows resting on his knees. She hesitated. She didn't know if she should answer honestly or invent something that would please him. She decided on the truth. "They said I would work, that I'd be useful somehow." He studied her for a few more seconds, then stood up slowly. He was even more imposing standing, easily over 6 feet tall. He walked to her, stopping a few steps away. Patricia felt her heart race, but forced herself not to back away. She learned early that showing fear only made things worse. Vincent then did something unexpected. He extended his hand. "My name is Vincent Caruso, and you won't work for me. You'll live with me." Patricia blinked, confused. This didn't make sense. None of this made sense. Before she could ask anything, he continued, his voice firm but not threatening. "I have 4 children. I lost my wife 3 years ago. They need someone to take care of them while I take care of business." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "I'm not asking you to be their mother, but I need someone at home, someone who's not afraid to stay." There was something different in his words. It wasn't an order. It was almost a request, almost a hope. Patricia couldn't respond immediately. Her eyes burned, but she blinked quickly to hold back tears. No one had ever said they needed her. No one. Since the diagnosis, she had become invisible in her own home. A shadow, a mistake, something to be hidden or discarded. And now, a stranger, a dangerous man, feared by all, was offering her a place. Not because she was perfect, not because she could give him something in return, but simply because he needed someone, and she was there. "What if I can't do it?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper, loaded with all the insecurity she had accumulated over the years. Vincent looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something beyond hardness. There was weariness there. There was pain. There was a humanity he hid very well from the rest of the world. "Then you try again. But I won't sell you. I won't hurt you. And no one here will touch you." There was something definitive in those words. A promise. Perhaps the first real promise anyone had ever made to her. And somehow strange and inexplicable, she believed him. Patricia nodded slowly, still processing everything. She had no choice. Not really. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was being pushed into the abyss. She felt that perhaps someone had extended a rope. Vincent gestured to one of his men, who immediately approached. "Take her to the house. Show her her room. And tell the children we have a new resident." The man agreed silently and indicated for Patricia to follow him. She picked up her suitcase, which weighed almost nothing because she owned almost nothing, and began to walk. But before leaving, she turned one last time to Vincent. He had already returned to his armchair, lighting a cigarette, but his eyes were still on her. "Thank you," she said, almost inaudible, the words coming out more from instinct than reason. He didn't respond, just nodded slightly, like someone acknowledging something but not quite knowing what. Patricia left the room with a tight heart, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something different. It wasn't hope, not yet. She didn't know if she would ever be capable of hope again, but it was the absence of despair. It was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed, that the fall had ended, and that, now, she could begin to rise. As she followed the man through the dark corridors of that unknown place, Patricia allowed herself to breathe, allowed herself to imagine that maybe this was the beginning of something new. She didn't know if it would be good. She didn't know if it would last, but she knew that for the first time in years, someone had said she could stay, and for now, that was enough. Vincent Caruso's mansion was immense, but strangely silent. The walls were covered with dark wallpaper, with old patterns that seemed to belong to another era. The furniture was heavy and made of noble wood, the kind that lasts generations, but which also carries the weight of untold stories. There was a persistent feeling of abandonment in every room, as if the house was waiting for something, or someone, who would never return. Patricia followed the man guiding her, a thin subject with a cold look and neutral expression, who didn't say a word during the entire journey. He led her through long corridors, where dusty portraits watched in silence, climbed wooden stairs that creaked under their feet, until finally stopping before a door on the second floor. "This is your room," he said, opening the door and entering without ceremony. Patricia followed him, surprised by what she saw. The room was simple but clean. There was a single bed with freshly changed white sheets, a small dark wooden desk against the wall, a chair that matched the table, and a large window overlooking the back garden. It wasn't luxurious, but it was more than she ever had. It was a space of her own, only hers. "The bathroom is at the end of the hallway. The children sleep downstairs. Breakfast is at 7, don't be late." Before she could thank him or ask any questions, he had already left, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Patricia stood in the center of the room for a few minutes, trying to believe this was real. She placed the suitcase on the floor and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the garden was covered with dry leaves. The trees swayed gently in the night wind, and there was a crescent moon illuminating everything with a silver and melancholic light. There was something somber about this place, but also something strangely protected, as if the outside world, with all its cruelty and rejection, couldn't reach her here. As if those high walls and iron gates served not only to keep people out, but also to keep those inside safe. She sat on the bed, feeling the mattress sink slightly under her weight. It was firm but comfortable, much better than the thin and worn mattress she had at home. No, not at home. That place was never really a home. It was just a place where she existed, where she occupied space, where she was tolerated until she ceased to be. Here, in this silent and unknown room, she allowed herself, for the first time in days, to breathe deeply. Her parents had sold her. She wouldn't forget that, wouldn't forgive. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different. She didn't yet know what Vincent Caruso expected of her, but she was willing to find out. After all, she had nothing left to lose. The next morning, Patricia woke before the non-existent alarm. The habit of waking early was so ingrained in her that she didn't even need an alarm clock. She dressed quickly with the few clothes she had, faded jeans, a simple cotton blouse, and went downstairs carefully, trying not to make noise. She followed the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen, a strong and comforting aroma that guided her through the still dark corridors. When she entered the kitchen, morning light was beginning to enter through the windows, and she found 4 pairs of eyes fixed on her. They were the children, sitting at the massive wooden table in absolute silence, each with a different expression on their face. The oldest, who appeared to be about 12, watched her with clear distrust. He had the same dark eyes as his father, but not yet the same hardness. There was a vulnerability there, a fear disguised as anger. Next to him, a girl about 10 years old was absent-mindedly playing with a spoon, but cast curious glances in Patricia's direction, evaluating her, trying to understand who this stranger was in her house. The 2 youngest, apparently 7-year-old twins, stared at her with mouths half open, as if she were an apparition, something that shouldn't be there but was. None of them spoke. They just watched. "Good morning," Patricia said, trying to sound confident, but her voice came out lower than intended. No one responded. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. She swallowed hard and walked to the stove, where a pot of porridge was still warm, probably prepared by someone earlier. She served herself in silence, took a bowl and spoon, and sat at the table, choosing a place that didn't seem invasive. She kept her eyes down, eating slowly, feeling the weight of each gaze on her. It was like being on trial, like being evaluated and probably considered insufficient. She knew this feeling well. "Are you the new maid?" the girl asked, finally breaking the silence with a soft but direct voice. Patricia raised her eyes, meeting the girl's brown and curious eyes. "Not exactly. I came to help." The answer sounded vague even to herself. The older boy huffed, crossing his arms over his chest in a defensive gesture. "Help? Of course. How many have already come to help?" There was bitterness in his voice, a distrust that went far beyond his age. Patricia realized immediately. These children had already seen many people come and go from their lives. They had already learned not to trust, not to attach, because attaching meant losing, and losing hurt. Patricia didn't know what to say. She didn't fully understand what was happening, didn't know the history of this family, didn't know how many people had passed through there before her, but she felt that these children had already suffered, had already been abandoned somehow, and now she was just another stranger who would soon leave. At least that's how they saw it. "I don't know what the others did," she said calmly, choosing her words carefully, "but I'm not leaving." The words came out before she could fully think them through, but the moment she said them, she felt they were true. She didn't know how, but somehow she knew she wouldn't leave. Not this time. The boy stared at her incredulous, almost offended by the audacity of the statement. "Everyone leaves." There was pain in those words, pain and anger, pain of someone who had already been left behind many times, pain of someone who learned to expect nothing from anyone. Patricia felt something tighten in her chest. She knew that feeling, of being left behind, of not being enough, of being disposable. She lived this every day since the diagnosis came, since her parents began to look at her with disappointment, since she became a burden, a mistake, something that shouldn't exist. She didn't respond to the boy, didn't try to convince him with empty words, just continued eating in silence. But something inside her decided at that moment. She didn't know how, but she would prove to those children that she was different, that she would stay, that she wouldn't abandon them, because she knew what it was to be abandoned. and she wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not on children who had already suffered so much. Vincent Caruso appeared a few minutes later, dressed in an impeccable dark suit, his hair still damp from the shower, smelling of soap and aftershave. He cast a quick look at the table, noticing Patricia sitting there among his children, and nodded briefly, a silent approval. "Good," was all he said, before picking up a cup of coffee and leaving through the back door, probably heading to some business no one would dare ask about. The twins followed him with their eyes, a mixture of admiration and fear on their small faces. The girl sighed and stood up, picking up her school backpack that was hanging on the chair. The oldest followed her, still casting distrustful looks at Patricia, as if she were a threat he needed to constantly monitor. When the kitchen finally emptied, Patricia was alone, looking at the empty table, at the dirty bowls, at the coffee remains at the bottom of the cups. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to approach those children or how to earn their trust. But she knew one thing: she wouldn't give up. Not this time. Because for the first time in her life, someone had said she could stay, and she wouldn't let this chance slip away. No matter how long it took, no matter how many times she was rejected, she would stay, because finally, after so long being invisible, someone had seen something in her worth keeping around. And that was more than she ever had. The first days in Vincent Caruso's house were more difficult than Patricia expected. The children didn't speak with her beyond the absolutely necessary. "Good morning, good night, thank you, sorry." Short words, empty of emotion, said more out of obligation than desire. The oldest, whom she discovered was named James, avoided her whenever possible. He left the room when she entered, averted his gaze when they crossed paths in the hallway, and never, ever initiated a conversation. The girl Emily was a bit gentler but still maintained a safe distance. She responded when Patricia asked something but never elaborated, never opened up, never gave more than the bare minimum. The twins, Timothy and Samuel, were the most curious but also the most frightened. They watched her from afar, whispered to each other when they thought she wasn't listening, and ran away if she approached too quickly. Patricia noticed all of this and understood. She wasn't foolish. She knew that trust isn't earned with words. It's earned with time, with presence, with consistency. And she had time. For the first time in her life, she had time. Patricia quickly realized that house was governed by silence and absence. Vincent left early every morning, often before sunrise, and returned late at night, frequently after the children had already gone to bed. When he was home, he was a silent presence, a ghost passing through the corridors without making noise, eating alone in his office, rarely interacting with the children beyond brief questions about school or short orders about behavior. He wasn't cruel, but he also wasn't affectionate. He was distant, as if there were an invisible wall between him and the rest of the world, a wall that not even his own children could completely cross. Patricia wondered about their mother. Vincent had mentioned she died 3 years ago, but gave no details, and no one in the house talked about her. There were no photos on the walls, no visible personal belongings, no mourning rituals. It was as if she had been erased, as if mentioning her name would open a wound no one had the courage to touch. Patricia respected that. She herself had wounds she preferred not to touch. She understood the impulse to bury pain so deep that no one else could see it, even if it meant burying the good memories along with it. She decided to start slowly. She wouldn't force anything, wouldn't try to be mother, wouldn't try to replace anyone. She would just be present, just do what needed to be done. Every morning she woke before everyone and prepared breakfast. Porridge, toast, fresh fruit when available. She made sure the children ate before going to school, that they had their backpacks ready, that they didn't forget anything important. In the afternoon, she cleaned the house, swept the endless corridors, dusted the old furniture, washed the windows that never seemed truly clean because of the city's pollution. She organized the rooms, washed clothes, ironed Vincent's shirts with meticulous care. At night, she waited for everyone to return and prepared dinner. Nothing too elaborate. She wasn't an experienced cook, but honest food made with care. Vegetable soup, roasted chicken, rice and beans, simple pasta with tomato sauce. The children ate in silence, sometimes thanked her, but never commented on the food. Vincent rarely dined with them. He usually stayed locked in his office, dealing with tense phone calls and meetings Patricia could hear through the closed door. But when he dined with the family, he ate in silence, watching, always watching. Patricia felt the weight of that gaze constantly. Vincent watched her, not in a threatening way, not in an invasive way, but with constant attention, as if he were evaluating, measuring, waiting to see if she would fail, if she would give up, if she would be like all the others who came before. Patricia didn't know how many there had been, didn't know their stories, their names, what made them leave, but she knew there were many. James had made that clear, and she knew none of them stayed. All left, all abandoned those children, and now those children expected nothing different from her. It was on a rainy night, 2 weeks after her arrival, that everything changed. Patricia was in the kitchen, washing the dinner dishes, the sound of running water mixing with the drumming of rain against the windows. It was a cold night, the kind that penetrates the bones and makes the house seem even bigger, even emptier. She was lost in thoughts, remembering things she'd prefer to forget, when she heard a noise coming from upstairs. It was a muffled cry, stifled, as if someone was trying very desperately not to be heard. She quickly dried her hands on a dish towel and went upstairs carefully, avoiding the steps that creaked louder. She followed the sound to the twins' room at the end of the hallway. The door was ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the dark corridor. She pushed it slowly and saw Timothy sitting on the floor, leaning against the bed, hugging his knees to his chest, his face buried in his arms. His body trembled with silent sobs. Samuel was sitting beside him, a hesitant hand on his brother's shoulder, trying to console him but clearly not knowing how. His own eyes were brimming, shining in the dim light of the lamp. "What happened?" Patricia asked gently, entering the room and kneeling beside them, keeping her voice low and calm. Samuel looked at her hesitant, clearly divided between trusting her and maintaining the distance they had established. But desperation won over caution. "He had a nightmare. Again. He always has nightmares when it rains." The boy's voice was small, frightened, loaded with the weight of having to care for his brother when he himself was just a child. Patricia felt her heart tighten. She knew nightmares, knew nights when sleep was more frightening than wakefulness. "Can I stay with you for a bit?" she asked, not wanting to invade, not wanting to force her presence where it wasn't desired. Timothy raised his face, eyes red and swollen, cheeks stained with tears. He said nothing but also didn't refuse. Just looked at her, vulnerable, small, completely unprotected. And in that look, Patricia saw herself, saw the child she was, the child no one consoled, the child who cried alone night after night. She sat on the floor beside them, back against the bed, and hesitant began to talk. Not about happy things, not about fairy tales or happy endings, but about her own childhood, about how she also had nightmares, about how she also felt alone, about how she discovered she couldn't have children and how her parents reacted, about how she felt broken, useless, disposable. She spoke quietly, the words coming out more easily than expected, because for the first time, someone was really listening, not judging, just listening. The twins listened to her in absolute silence, absorbing every word, and gradually, very gradually, Timothy stopped crying. His breathing calmed, his body relaxed. Samuel leaned against her, tiredness finally winning over fear. And there, sitting on the cold floor of a dark room, in a house that wasn't quite a home yet, something changed. Something opened. A door that was locked began to open, just a crack, but enough to let in a little light. When the twins finally fell asleep, Patricia helped them climb into their beds, covered them carefully, and stayed there for a few more minutes, just watching them sleep. They looked so small, so fragile. Children who had grown up too fast, who had learned to hide pain because no one was there to see it. She stood up slowly, adjusted the blankets one last time, and turned to leave. That's when she saw James standing in the doorway, watching her in silence. She froze, not knowing what to say, not knowing how long he'd been there. He said nothing for a long moment, just looked at her. But there was something different in his look. The distrust was still there, but there was also something else, something softer, maybe respect, maybe the beginning of something that could eventually become trust. Patricia passed by him in silence, without saying anything, because sometimes words are unnecessary. And when she went downstairs back to the kitchen, she felt that something had changed. She didn't know exactly what, but she knew it was important. What she didn't see was Vincent Caruso watching everything from that night from the dark hallway, leaning against the wall, invisible in the shadows. He saw Patricia with his children, saw the way she treated them, not with pity, not with obligation, but with something he hadn't seen in a long time in that house. Genuine care, real empathy, the willingness to be present in pain, not just in joy. He said nothing, didn't approach, just stood there watching until Patricia went downstairs and returned to her room. Then, he silently entered the twins' room, checked if they were well covered, adjusted Timothy's blanket that had slipped, and stood there for a moment, just watching his children sleep. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he wanted to be for them, but words never came easily. And affection, touch, emotional connection, all of that seemed to have died with his wife. He no longer knew how to access those parts of himself, no longer knew how to be a father beyond providing, protecting, keeping alive. But as he walked back to his office, a strange feeling took hold of him. Maybe for the first time since his wife's death, he wasn't completely alone in the responsibility of caring for those children. Maybe Patricia wasn't like the others. Maybe she really would stay. He wouldn't allow hope to enter easily. Hope was a weakness in his world, but there was something there, something small, something fragile, but something real. And as much as he tried to ignore it, he couldn't. Patricia was changing his house, and he didn't yet know if that was good or dangerous. The weeks turned into months, and the routine in Vincent Caruso's house began to change almost imperceptibly, like the changing of seasons. So gradual that no one notices until one day they look around and realize everything is different. Patricia was no longer just a silent presence, taking care of household tasks. She had become part of the structure of that strange and broken family, a pillar no one knew was missing until she appeared. James, the oldest, finally began to talk to her. At first they were just short words, quick responses when she asked about school or how his day had been. It was good, nothing much. I had a math test. But gradually, the answers became longer. He began to tell her about classmates, about teachers he didn't like, about the weight he felt on his shoulders for being Vincent Caruso's oldest son. A weight that no one at school fully knew about, but everyone felt. The other boys treated him differently, with fear, with forced respect, but never with genuine friendship. "Nobody wants to be my real friend," he confessed one afternoon, while Patricia prepared dinner and he sat at the kitchen table, pretending to do homework, but actually just watching her chop vegetables. "They're afraid of my dad, or they want something from him." Patricia stopped what she was doing and looked at him. There was so much pain in that young face, so much loneliness that no 12-year-old should carry. "You're not your father," she said gently. "You're you, and people who can't see that, who can't know you for what you really are, don't deserve your friendship." James looked at her surprised, as if no one had ever said anything like that to him. "But what if I become like him?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What if I turn into him?" Patricia put the knife on the cutting board and approached, sitting beside him. "You have a choice. You always have a choice. Your father made his choices. But you're not obligated to follow the same path." Emily, the 10-year-old girl, began to sit beside Patricia in the kitchen while she prepared dinner, asking questions about absolutely everything. About Patricia's life before there, about what she liked to eat, about her dreams, about why she read so much, about what it was like to have parents who didn't want you. That last question was asked on a Saturday afternoon, while Patricia folded clean clothes in the living room and Emily helped her, separating socks by size. "Why didn't your parents want you?" the girl asked, with the brutal frankness only children possess. Patricia paused, a shirt of James's in her hands, and thought carefully about how to respond. She could lie, could soften it, but decided on the truth. Emily deserved the truth, because I wasn't what they expected. I couldn't give them what they wanted, so for them I had no value. Emily frowned, processing this. But that's stupid. You have value. You take care of us. You make good food. You listen when we talk. The girl stopped, searching for the right words. You stay. Those last words hit Patricia with unexpected force. She felt her eyes burn, but blinked quickly to hold back tears. Thank you, Emily, that means a lot to me. The girl nodded, satisfied, and went back to separating socks. But Patricia realized something in that moment. She wasn't just caring for those children. They were, somehow, caring for her too, showing her that she had value, that she was seen, that she mattered. The twins, Timothy and Samuel, attached themselves to her in a way even Vincent didn't expect. They followed her around the house like two puppies, always wanting to help with whatever she was doing. If she was sweeping, they grabbed cloths and cleaned furniture. If she was cooking, they pulled chairs to reach the sink and insisted on washing dishes. If she was in the garden, they appeared with small gardening tools they had found in the shed and began digging random holes, proclaiming they were helping. She never had the heart to say she didn't need help, because she realized it wasn't about helping. It was about being close. It was about not being alone. It was about having someone who didn't disappear. Every night, without exception, they asked her to tell stories before bed. At first, Patricia didn't know what stories to tell. She didn't know many fairy tales, hadn't read many children's books. So, she began to invent. She created entire worlds for them. Worlds where unlikely heroes saved the day, where lost children found homes, where dragons weren't always villains, and where princesses didn't need to be rescued because they knew how to save themselves. Stories where the family you choose is as valid as the family you're born into. Stories where broken people find ways to fix themselves together. And gradually, as she told these stories to the twins, as she saw their eyes shine with imagination and their mouths open in surprise at plot twists, Patricia began to believe her own words, began to believe that maybe for her too, a happy ending was possible, that maybe she also deserved a home, that maybe being broken didn't mean being beyond repair. It just meant the repair would be different, more creative, more honest. It meant accepting the cracks and learning to live with them instead of pretending they didn't exist. Vincent watched everything from afar, as he always did. He wasn't a man of many words, never was. His life had taught him that words were often empty, that promises were easily broken, and that actions were the only currency of real value. But he began to trust Patricia more, began to realize she wasn't like the others who had passed through that house. The others came for money or status or fear. But Patricia came because she had nowhere to go, and stayed because she chose to stay. Not because it was easy. Anyone who spent a day in that house would realize it wasn't easy. But because she saw something in those children worth staying for. He began to leave notes in the morning when he left early. Small notes in his angular and hard-to-read handwriting. James has dentist at 3 p.m. Emily needs new materials for science project. The twins can't eat chocolate. Timothy is allergic. Practical things, necessary information, but also, in a way, a recognition that she was part of the family now, that she needed to know these things, that she mattered. At night, when he returned from work, he began to ask about the children, how their day had been, if they had eaten well, if they had done their homework. Simple questions, but revealing a care he usually kept hidden. And Patricia responded, giving him detailed but kind reports, never making the children seem problematic, always finding something positive to mention. James got a high grade in math. Emily drew a beautiful picture today. It's on the fridge. The twins helped prepare dinner. Small victories that Vincent appreciated more than he showed. And on rare occasions, he sat at the table with the family, not just passed through the kitchen to grab coffee and rush out, but really sat, ate with them, listened to conversations. He didn't participate much, wasn't ready for that yet, but he was present. And for those children who had spent years eating in silence, feeling their father's heavy absence even when he was in the same house, having him there, physically present, was something precious, something they didn't know how to verbalize, but felt deeply. Patricia noticed these changes, noticed how the house was different, no longer so silent, no longer so heavy. There was laughter now. There were conversations. There were moments of lightness that didn't exist before. She wasn't sure if it was because of her, or if it was simply time doing its healing work. It was probably a combination of both. But she allowed herself, for the first time, to feel proud, to feel she was making a difference, that her presence mattered, that she wasn't useless, as her parents had said, that she had value beyond her ability to bear children, that she was complete as she was, broken, but complete. One night, about 6 months after her arrival, Vincent called her to his office. Patricia entered with slight nervousness. Calls to the office always brought a weight of formality, of seriousness. Vincent was sitting behind his heavy oak desk, papers scattered everywhere, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him, a glass with 2 fingers of amber liquid in his hand. He raised his eyes when she entered, and there was something different in his face, something softer than usual. He gestured for her to sit in the chair before the desk. She obeyed, hands nervous in her lap. "You stayed," he said, straight to the point, without beating around the bush. It was a statement, not a question. Patricia nodded. "Yes." Vincent took a sip of whiskey, eyes never leaving her face. "Why?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, thinking carefully about the answer. It would be easy to give a simple, superficial answer. But Vincent Caruso wasn't a man of superficialities. He deserved honesty. Because for the first time in my life, someone gave me a place. Not because I was useful, not because I could give something in return, but because you said I could stay, that I had a place here, and that meant everything to me. Vincent studied her for a long moment, silence stretching between them. Patricia could hear the old clock on the wall marking the seconds, could hear the distant sounds of the house, water running somewhere, footsteps upstairs, wind beating against the windows. "My children like you," Vincent finally said. It wasn't a question, but an observation. Patricia nodded anyway. "I like them too, very much." He nodded slowly, as if making a decision he'd been pondering for some time. "I'm not a good man, Patricia. You know that. You know what I do. You know who I am." She kept her gaze steady, not looking away. "I know. And still, you stay. Still, I stay." Vincent leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking slightly under his weight. He placed the glass on the desk and ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of something that could be tiredness or vulnerability. "Then you're no longer a guest here. This is your home now, officially. And those children are your responsibility too. Not just because I pay you to care for them, but because you're part of this family now." The words hit Patricia with a force she didn't expect. She felt something break inside her, not from pain, but from something like freedom, like acceptance, like belonging. She had a home, not because someone bought her, not because she was obligated, but because she chose to stay, and someone finally chose her back. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked, the words barely able to come out. Vincent nodded and returned his attention to the papers on the desk, ending the conversation in his typical way. But as Patricia stood to leave, he spoke again, his voice lower. "My wife, she would have liked you." Patricia stopped, hand on the doorknob, and looked back. Vincent wasn't looking at her. He was looking at a small framed photo on the desk, hidden among the papers, a photo Patricia had never noticed before. "Thank you for telling me that," she said softly. And then she left, closing the door behind her carefully. She returned to her room that night with a light heart in a way she had never experienced before. She lay in bed and looked at the ceiling, allowing herself, for the first time, to imagine a future where she wasn't alone, where she had a family, strange, imperfect, built on unlikely circumstances but hers, where she mattered, where she had purpose, where she was loved, even if no one used that word yet. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if Vincent would return safe and sound from his dark nights. Didn't know if the children would continue to trust her. Didn't know if she would ever be able to completely fill the void their mother had left. But she knew one thing. She wouldn't run away, wouldn't give up, because for the first time in her life, she had something worth fighting for. She had a home, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would take that from her. She had been rejected, had been sold, had been considered worthless. But now, in this strange house, with this dangerous man and these wounded children, she had found something her own parents could never give her: acceptance. And that was everything. 3 years had passed since Patricia arrived at Vincent Caruso's mansion, carrying only a worn suitcase and a broken heart. And the house was no longer the dark and silent place it was before. There was laughter echoing through the corridors. There were animated conversations at the dinner table. There was music coming from the rooms. There was life pulsing in every room, filling the empty spaces that once seemed insurmountable. The transformation had been gradual, almost imperceptible, day to day. But looking back, it was impossible not to see how much everything had changed. James, now 15 years old, had become a serious and responsible young man, but who had finally learned to smile. He had opened up completely with Patricia, seeing her not as a substitute for his mother. No one could replace that loss, and Patricia never tried, but as someone who genuinely cared about him, someone he could trust, someone who saw him for what he really was, not for the surname he carried. He shared his fears with her, his hopes, his dreams of maybe one day doing something different from his father, something that didn't involve blood and shadows. And Patricia listened, always, without judgment, offering only support and the certainty that his choices were his to make. Emily, at 13, had become a confident and expressive young woman, full of strong opinions and ambitious dreams. She wanted to be a doctor, wanted to help people, wanted to make a difference in the world. And Patricia encouraged her in every step, helping her with studies, listening to her theories about biology and anatomy, encouraging her when grades didn't come as expected. Emily sought advice from Patricia about absolutely everything, from complicated friendships at school to questions about growing up, about body changes, about how to navigate the confusing world of adolescence. And Patricia responded with honesty and care, grateful to have the trust of that brilliant and determined girl. The twins, Timothy and Samuel, now 10 years old, were inseparable both from each other and from Patricia. They affectionately called her Patty, a nickname that had emerged naturally and that she loved. They still asked for stories before bed, although now they preferred more complex adventures with plot twists and multifaceted characters. Patricia had become quite creative over the years, inventing entire sagas that extended for weeks, with the twins eagerly awaiting the next chapter each night. Timothy's nightmares had decreased significantly, appearing only occasionally on particularly stormy nights. And when they appeared, he didn't hesitate to seek out Patricia, knowing she would be there. And Vincent was an enigma that gradually had revealed itself in ways even he didn't expect. He was still the feared man, still the implacable boss who controlled a dark empire, still disappeared for days on business. Patricia preferred not to know in detail, but when he was home, he was truly present, no longer just a shadow passing through the corridors. He dined with the family regularly, asked about each child's day, listened to their stories, their problems, their joys, and on rare but precious occasions, he smiled, a small smile, almost imperceptible, but genuine. In those moments, Patricia saw the man he could have been in other circumstances, the man who still existed, buried under layers of hardness and the need for survival. It was on a winter night, 3 years after her arrival, with the fireplace lit, filling the room with warmth and dancing light, that Patricia realized how much everything had really changed. The family was gathered, James doing homework on the sofa, Emily reading a thick medical book she had borrowed from the library, the twins playing chess on the rug, arguing amicably about the rules. Patricia was sitting in her favorite armchair, mending Samuel's shirt that had torn during recess. It was a common domestic scene, almost banal. But for her, it was extraordinary. It was everything she never knew she wanted. It was peace. It was belonging. It was home. Vincent entered the room, tired after a long day, jacket thrown over his shoulder, tie loose. He stopped at the entrance for a moment, just watching the scene before him. His children, happy, healthy, alive in a way they hadn't been in years. And Patricia, at the center of everything, keeping that family together with her quiet and constant presence. He walked to his favorite armchair, beside the fireplace, and sat with a sigh. The twins ran to greet him as they always did, hugging him and excitedly telling about their day. He listened to them attentively, a hand in each one's hair. When the twins returned to their chess game, Vincent was silent for a few moments, just watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Then he turned to Patricia, and for the first time in 3 years, addressed her not as employee, not as staff, but as someone who belonged to that family as much as anyone there. "You transformed this house," he said, his voice low but firm, each word loaded with meaning. "Transformed my children. They are happy. I didn't know anymore if that was possible after we lost her. But you brought that back." He paused, searching for the right words. "And you transformed me too. Reminded me that I'm still a father, that I can still be more than what the world sees." Patricia felt her eyes burn, tears threatening to overflow. She blinked quickly, trying to keep them contained, but it was useless. "I just did what anyone would do," she said, her voice choked. Vincent shook his head slowly, firmly. "No, you did what few people would do. You stayed, even when you had no clear reasons to stay. Even when the whole world told you that you were worth nothing. Even when your own parents rejected you, you stayed. And you didn't just stay. You chose to love children who weren't yours. You chose to build a family with strangers. That isn't common. That is extraordinary." He stood and walked to her. Patricia also stood, not fully understanding what was happening, heart beating fast in her chest. Vincent extended his hand, and she held it, confused. "You're no longer a guest here, Patricia. You're no longer a helper or a nanny or any other practical title we can use. You're family. You're their mother in all the ways that matter. And I want you to know that if someday your parents return, if anyone tries to take you from here, if any person in this world tries to make you feel you don't belong in this house, they'll have to go through me first, because you're ours, and we're yours, and that's the only truth that matters." The words hit Patricia with the force of a giant wave, knocking down all the barriers she had built over the years to protect herself. Tears flowed freely down her face, without shame, without attempt to hide them. For the first time in her life, she felt no need to hide her emotions, because these weren't tears of pain. They weren't tears of rejection or shame. They were tears of relief, of acceptance, of gratitude, of love, of finally, after a lifetime of searching, finding where she belonged. James, Emily, and the twins, who had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene, stood as one and hugged Patricia, forming a tight circle around her. Small and large arms intertwined, faces nestled against her. Words of love were whispered. "We love you, Patty. You're our real mother. Don't ever leave. Thank you for staying." And Patricia, surrounded by those children who weren't hers by blood but were completely hers by choice, felt complete in a way she never imagined possible. Vincent stood there watching, and for the first time in years, allowed a tear to roll down his face too. He had lost so much, had so much blood on his hands. But in that moment, in that room illuminated by the fireplace, surrounded by his children and the woman who had saved them, he felt his house was complete, that his family, broken and mended in unlikely ways, was finally united. Months later, on a sunny spring morning, Patricia was in the garden with Emily, teaching her to plant roses. The girl was excited, hands dirty with soil, hair tied in a messy ponytail. They were laughing about something silly, just enjoying each other's company, when an unknown car stopped in front of the mansion. Patricia felt her stomach tighten before even seeing who it was. There was something in the way the car stopped, something in the energy it brought that made her know. Two figures got out, a man and a woman, both older than she remembered, with worn clothes and faces deeply marked by time and bad choices. Gray hair, bent backs, eyes that had seen too much. She recognized them immediately. They were her parents. Patricia's heart raced, beating so hard she could hear it in her own ears. She hadn't seen them since that terrible day 3 years ago, when they took her to Vincent and sold her as if she were nothing, as if she were merchandise, as if her life, her feelings, her humanity didn't matter. Now there they were, standing at the iron gate, looking at the imposing mansion with expressions that mixed something between regret, desperation, and, Patricia realized with bitterness, hope of financial gain. They were probably out of money, probably needed something, and probably thought she, being in such a large house, would have access to resources. Emily beside her immediately noticed the change in Patricia's body, the sudden tension, the way she had frozen, the gardening spade falling from her trembling hands. "Patty? Who are they?" Emily asked, her voice concerned, young but protective. Patricia swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. "People from my past." Her voice came out firmer than expected, but she could feel the cracks beneath the surface. Emily, smart as always, understood immediately. She took Patricia's hand and held it tightly. "Do you want me to call Daddy?" Patricia shook her head. "You don't need to. I can handle this." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure they were true. At that moment, as if he had a sixth sense for when his family needed him, Vincent came out the front door. He was in shirt sleeves, something rare for someone who normally wore a complete suit. He had been working at home today, dealing with paperwork in his office, but something made him come out. Maybe the sound of the car, maybe the way Patricia stood motionless in the garden, maybe just instinct. His eyes went immediately to her, reading her body language, seeing the fear and anger mixed in her face. Then he looked at the visitors, and his expression hardened. He walked calmly to where they were standing outside the gate, deliberately blocking the path to Patricia. His broad shoulders created a physical barrier, his intimidating height used with purpose. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice controlled but cold. There was an implicit threat there, a warning anyone with half a brain would recognize immediately. Patricia's father stepped forward, hesitant, clearly uncomfortable but trying to maintain some appearance of authority. "We came to see our daughter." The words sounded false even to himself. Vincent didn't move. His expression didn't change. "Your daughter," he repeated, each word loaded with absolute disdain. "You sold her. Remember? You brought her to me 3 years ago and negotiated a price for her life as if she were cattle, as if she weren't human, as if she had no value." He took a step forward, and Patricia's parents instinctively backed away. "So no, she's not your daughter anymore. You lost that right the moment you treated her like merchandise." Patricia's mother lowered her eyes, ashamed, unable to maintain Vincent's gaze. But the father insisted, stubbornness or desperation making him continue even when he should have realized it was useless. "We made a mistake. We were desperate. We needed money. Things were bad. But we want to make amends. We want to talk to her. Give her a chance to forgive us." Vincent crossed his arms over his chest. "She doesn't want to talk to you," he said with absolute finality. "And even if she did, I wouldn't allow it, because you don't deserve even a second of her time. You don't deserve her forgiveness. You don't deserve anything." Before they could protest, before they could make any more pathetic appeals, Patricia approached. Emily still held her hand, refusing to let go, and James had appeared from somewhere inside the house, positioning himself protectively beside them. The twins also appeared on the porch, watching with large and confused eyes. Patricia stopped beside Vincent, breathing deeply, gathering all the courage she had built over those 3 years. She looked at her parents, the faces that were once everything to her, that she loved unconditionally as only children can love, and that now were just strangers. Strangers who had hurt her more deeply than any person should ever be able to hurt another. You had a choice, she said, her voice starting tremulous, but gaining strength with each word. When you discovered I couldn't have children, you had a choice. You could have loved me just the same. You could have told me I still had value, that I was still your daughter, that I still mattered. Her voice broke slightly, but she continued, refusing to stop now. But you chose to make me feel I was useless, that I was a burden, that I didn't deserve love because my body didn't work the way you wanted. And then, when you had the chance to do the right thing, you sold me. You took me to a stranger and negotiated a price for my life. Her father tried to speak, but she interrupted him with a firm hand gesture. No, you're going to listen to me now. You had years to speak, to make me feel small. Now it's my turn. She breathed deeply, feeling Emily's hand squeezing hers, feeling Vincent's solid presence beside her, feeling the love of her children, because yes, they were her children now, surrounding her like a shield. I was lucky, because the man you sold me to didn't treat me like merchandise. He gave me a home. He gave me a family. He showed me I had value, even though you could never see it. She looked at Vincent for a moment, gratitude shining in her eyes, before returning her gaze to her parents. You came here expecting what? Forgiveness, money, an emotional reconciliation where I forget everything and we go back to being a family. She shook her head firmly. That's never going to happen, because you're not my family anymore. Not in the way that matters. Family doesn't abandon you when you don't meet expectations. Family doesn't sell you when things get difficult. Family stays, and you didn't stay. She took a step forward, and for the first time in her life, saw her parents back away from her, saw fear and shame in their faces, and realized they no longer had power over her. None. I'm no longer the broken and frightened girl you sold. I'm strong now. I'm loved. I'm mother to 4 incredible children who chose me as much as I chose them. I have a real home with people who see me for what I really am. And you no longer have a place in my life. You no longer have power over me. Her mother finally found courage to speak, tears running down her aged face. Patricia, please. We're sorry. We were wrong. Patricia interrupted her, her voice softer now but no less firm. Maybe you are sorry. Maybe you really regret it. And if that's the case, I hope you find peace with that. But that forgiveness, that reconciliation, won't come from me, because I don't owe you anything. I already spent years of my life trying to be good enough for you, trying to deserve your love. And now I know the truth. I always deserved love. I was always good enough. You just couldn't see it. She turned, deliberately giving them her back, a final gesture of dismissal. Don't come back here. Don't try to contact me. You made your choice 3 years ago, and I'm making mine now. I choose my family. I choose the people who stayed. I choose to protect myself. And that means you can no longer be part of my life. With that, she held Emily's hand more tightly and went back inside the house, James and the twins following her immediately. Vincent remained for one more moment, staring at Patricia's parents with an intensity that would make stronger men tremble. If I see you near this house again, near her, or near any member of this family, there will be consequences, and I guarantee you won't like them. It wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise, and they knew it. Patricia's father opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to beg, but Vincent had already turned and was walking back to the house, his steps firm and decided. The door closed behind him with finality, and the sound echoed like a period at the end of a chapter that was finally, definitely, closed. Inside the house, Patricia was in the living room surrounded by her children. She was still trembling, adrenaline running through her veins, emotions threatening to overflow. But when she looked around and saw her children, James with a protective hand on her shoulder, Emily holding her hand, the twins hugging her legs, she felt the storm inside her begin to calm. Vincent entered the room and walked to her. Without saying a word, he pulled her into a hug. It was rare for him. Physical displays of affection weren't his forte, but in that moment, he knew it was what she needed. And Patricia allowed herself to collapse, letting the tears flow, letting all the fear, all the anger, all the pain of years being rejected finally come out. "You are so brave," he murmured in her hair. "So strong. I'm proud of you." The words broke something inside her, but in a good way, in a healing way, because they were words she had never heard from her father, words she secretly always wished to hear. And now, from this man who wasn't her father by blood, but who had become her family by choice, she was finally hearing them. When she finally pulled away, wiping tears, she looked around at her family, her real family, and smiled. A tremulous smile, but genuine. "Thank you," she said, voice still choked. "Thank you for staying, for showing me what family really means, for loving me when I couldn't love myself." Emily hugged her again, tight. "We'll always love you, Patty. Always. You're our mother, for real. It doesn't matter what those people said. You're ours." James agreed, his adolescent voice deeper now. "You saved us. When Mom died, we were lost. And you found us, helped us be a family again." The twins, always expressive, just hugged her tighter, burying their faces in her clothes, refusing to let go. That night, after the children finally went to bed, emotionally exhausted from the day, Patricia stayed awake in the living room looking at the fire, slowly dying in the fireplace. Vincent joined her, 2 cups of tea in his hands. He handed her one and sat beside her. They stayed in comfortable silence for a long time, just appreciating each other's company. Finally, Vincent spoke. "You know that was the end, right? They won't come back." Patricia nodded. "I know, and I'm okay with that. Actually, I'm more than okay. I'm free. For the first time in my life, I'm completely free of them. Free from the need for their approval, free from the pain of not being enough, free from everything." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "And it's all thanks to you. You gave me that. You gave me a life, a family, a home. You gave me everything." Vincent shook his head. "No, you gave yourself that. I just offered a place. You're the one who transformed that place into a home. You're the one who took 4 broken children and a lost father and somehow transformed us into a real family. That was all you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When they brought you to me 3 years ago, I didn't expect anything. I thought you'd be like the others, that you'd stay a few weeks, maybe a few months, and then leave. Everyone always leaves." He looked at his hands, calloused and marked by a life of violence. "But you stayed, and you didn't just stay. You cared. Really. Not for money, not for status, not for fear, but because you have a heart I don't understand, but am eternally grateful exists." He finally looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his look. "You saved my children, but more than that, you saved me too. Reminded me there was still humanity in me, that I could be more than just the monster the world sees." Patricia took his hand, this large and frightening hand that had protected so much, and held it tenderly. "You were never just a monster, Vincent. You were always a father, always a protector, always loved your children, even when you didn't know how to show it. I just helped you remember how." They stayed like that for a long time, hands intertwined, looking at the fire. 2 survivors who somehow found each other in the middle of chaos and built something beautiful together. 5 years later, Patricia was standing in the audience of a large university, watching Emily climb on stage to receive her medical degree. Beside her were Vincent, James, now a young man studying law, and the twins, now tall and noisy teenagers. When Emily took her diploma and looked at them in the audience, her smile was radiant. She waved and Patricia waved back, tears of pride running down her face. This was her daughter, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by years of care and dedication. And she had become an incredible young woman. That night, at the celebration party at home, with friends and family scattered throughout the room, Patricia had a moment to breathe and look around. Her family, her home, her life. It was all so different from where she started. She had been rejected, sold, considered worthless. But now, surrounded by people who loved her, who chose her as much as she chose them, she realized something fundamental. Value isn't something others give you. It's something you recognize in yourself. And she finally, after so many years, recognized her own value. Vincent approached her, a glass of champagne in hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She smiled. "About how life is strange. About how the worst things that happen to us sometimes lead to the best. If my parents hadn't sold me, I never would have found you. Never would have had this family. Never would have had this home." She looked at him. "So in a strange and twisted way, I'm grateful. Not for what they did, but for what it led me to find." Vincent nodded, understanding. Life breaks us, but sometimes in the cracks is where the light enters. He raised his glass. "To you, Patricia. To the woman who transformed a house into a home, who transformed 4 strangers into a family, who reminded me what really matters in this life." Patricia raised her glass too, and they toasted. Around them, the party continued, laughter and music filling the air, and Patricia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she should be. She had been sold because of infertility, had been considered worthless by those who should love her unconditionally, but a mafia boss with 4 children took her in, and together they built something none of them expected, a real family, a chosen family, a family that proved love has nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice, commitment, and the courage to stay when everyone else leaves. And as Patricia looked around her house full of life and love, she finally understood. She wasn't useless, never was. She was exactly who she should be, and she was more than enough. She was perfect in her imperfection. She was complete in her brokenness. She was loved, deeply and truly loved, and that was all that ever mattered.